Well, first thing Dorian told me when I picked him up from the rehab center was, "Don't get attached. I'm not staying long, and I don't mean here." Well, he said it staring straight out the windshield, both hands flat on his thighs, like he'd rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror that morning. I'd driven 2 hours up I-95 to get him. I had a folder on the passenger seat with his discharge paperwork, a list of his medications, and a printout from his case manager that I'd already read 4 times. I moved the folder to the back so he could sit, and that was the first thing out of his mouth. Not hello. Not thanks for coming. Warning, delivered to the glass. Well, I'm Wesley. I was 29 that fall, and I had just become a live-in aide for a man I'd never met in a town I'd visited exactly once, because the agency that hired me was short-staffed, and I was the only person on their list willing to relocate to a small place outside Asheville on 3 days' notice. Okay, I said, and pulled out of the parking lot. Over at me for the first time. I felt it more than saw it, that flick of attention people do when they're checking whether you understood the assignment. I kept my eyes on the road. "Holes it," he said. "Okay." "Well, you said don't get attached, I heard you." "Holt, most people argue." "Most people are working an angle," I said. "I just got here." Well, it made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. More like he'd filed something away. Dorian Vance was 44. He'd had a spinal cord injury 11 months earlier, a motorcycle and a delivery truck, and a wet exit ramp, and he'd spent most of the time since then in one facility or another, while his body decided how much it was going to give back. The answer mostly was his legs. A wheelchair now, a lightweight one with red spokes that he clearly hated and clearly relied on, which I was learning was the central contradiction of his entire personality. Ol's was a single-story rental at the end of a gravel road, ramped at the front, with a view of the Blue Ridge that the listing had probably charged an extra $200 a month for. His sister had set it up before she moved back to Ohio for her own family. There was a whiteboard in the kitchen with her handwriting still on it. Groceries, PT, twos, Thurs, call mom. He wheeled past it without looking. "Room's the one on the left," he said. "Mine's the master, bathroom in the hall is yours. Don't reorganize the kitchen, don't move anything in the living room, and don't." He stopped at the threshold and turned the chair to face me. "Don't hover. I can hear hovering. It has a sound." "Oh, what does it sound like?" "Oh, footsteps that don't go anywhere." I set my bag down in the hall. "I'll try to go somewhere with mine." That night I made pasta because it was the only thing I could find enough of, and we ate at a table that was too big for 2 people, at opposite corners, the way you sit when neither of you has decided yet whether you're going to be a we. He ate left-handed and fast. There was a stack of mail on his end of the table, most of it unopened, a lot of it from places with logos that meant insurance or collections. I didn't say anything about it. "Well, you're not what they usually send," he said. Or, what do they usually send? 42-year-olds who call me buddy, or church ladies who pray over the dishes. Had one guy who narrated everything. "Now we're going to take our medication, now we're going to do our stretches." Like I was a nature documentary. What happened to him? Told him if he said "we" one more time I'd make him do the stretches. He almost smiled. He lasted 9 days. The number quickly because he kept it like a scoreboard. 9 days. Before that, 3 weeks. Before that, a woman named Patrice who'd quit by text. He told me about all of them in the first week, casually, the way you'd mentioned the weather, and I understood pretty fast that the casualness was the whole point. He was showing me the exits before I could find them myself. About Dorian was that he was good at being difficult in a way that was almost a craft. He'd ask me to grab something from a high shelf and then, when I reached for it, say, "Actually, never mind," just to see if I'd get irritated. He left his chair angled in the hallway one morning, so I'd have to ask him to move, and watched my face while I decided whether to squeeze past or wait. I waited. He moved. Neither of us said anything about it. 4th day, I'd figured out the rhythm of him. He was sharpest in the mornings before the pain caught up. By afternoon, he'd go quiet, and I learned that the quiet wasn't sulking, it was conservation. He had a fixed amount of energy, and he spent most of it pretending he had more. What he didn't know I noticed. The way he checked the weather app obsessively before his PT days. Because rain made the ramp at the clinic slick and the parking harder. The way he'd line up his pills the night before so I wouldn't see him struggle with the bottles in the morning. The bills he sorted into 2 piles, one he opened and one he didn't, and how the second pile kept getting taller. On the 6th day, I did something I'd been told not to do, which was fix a thing without being asked. The bathroom doorway he used was a hair too narrow for his chair, and the doorframe had a gouge in it at wheel height where he'd been clipping it for weeks. I had a screwdriver and a free afternoon, so I took the door off the hinges entirely and leaned it in the garage. When he came back from his room and saw the empty frame, he stopped dead. "Well, who said you could do that?" "Ollie, the door was losing the fight. I retired it." "Wolf, that's not your call." Harper. I sat down on the edge of the tub so I wasn't standing over him. "I'll put it back if you want, but you've got a quarter-inch of clearance through there, and you've been paying for it in knuckles. I figured you had better things to bleed for." Looked at the frame for a long time. The mountains were turning gold outside the little window. Finally, he said, "Leave it off." "Well, okay. Ole, and don't make it a thing." "Well, a thing. It's a door. It's in the garage. It's having a timeout." Well, he didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth did something it hadn't done yet, and he turned the chair around and went to make coffee. And I heard him moving the mugs, and for about 10 seconds, the house didn't feel like a job. Or, the reason any of this mattered, the reason I'm telling it all, came on a Thursday, near the end of the second week, when I came back from the store and found him sitting in the middle of the living room floor, or in his chair, on the floor. He'd transferred to the couch to reach something, and the couch had a wheel of its own apparently, a little caster on the leg, and it had rolled, and he'd gone down between the couch and the coffee table, and couldn't get the leverage to get back up. He'd been there, I found out later, almost 40 minutes. The chair was 3 feet away and might as well have been in another county. Bought the grocery bags. I started toward him. "Oh, stop," he said. Or, I stopped. Voice was flat and furious, and underneath it, something I hadn't heard from him yet, something thin. "Don't you dare just scoop me up. Don't carry me like a don't." "Won't," I said. "Tell me how." Well, he blinked. Whatever he'd been braced for, that wasn't it. "Tell me how you do it," I said again. "When you're alone, what's the way that works for you?" Wolfed for a second. Then he told me, "Get the chair. Lock it, this angle. Hand here. No, lower. Let me do the lifting. You're a backstop, not a crane. It took 4 tries. He swore through most of it. At the couch, at the caster, at the engineer who designed a sofa that could move. When he finally got himself up and over and seated and squared away, he was breathing hard and his hands were shaking and he wouldn't look at me. Well, I picked up the groceries and started putting them away because I figured the kindest thing I could do was give him something other than my face to deal with. While, he said, from the other room, most people would have grabbed me. Told me not to. Told them that doesn't usually stop them. Mole, it stopped me. Or the chair roll. He came to the kitchen doorway. He looked wrecked, and he looked like he was deciding something. "One," he said. "Before you." He grabbed me. Off the floor, just hauled me up like a sack of feed, real proud of himself, hero of the day. And I let him, because what was I going to do? And then he told my sister I was a fall risk, and she should look into a place. A facility. With nurses and a meal schedule and a courtyard you can't leave. His jaw worked. I built my whole life so nobody could put me anywhere. And one guy who wanted to feel useful almost undid it in a week. I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "That's not being useful. That's being in charge and calling it help." Told me sharp. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly it." That was the night it shifted, though neither of us would have admitted it. We sat in the living room with the TV off and he told me about before. The contracting business he'd run. The houses he'd framed with his own hands. The wife who'd left in year 2 of the injury. Not because she was cruel, he said, but because she kept waiting for the old version of him to come back and got tired of the waiting room. He said it without much heat. He'd done his grieving about her already. The thing he hadn't finished grieving, I could tell, was the part of himself that used to be able to fix anything, and now couldn't get off his own living room floor. "We'll fix things," I said. "You just argue with everyone about how." "Wholesome, that's not the same." It's not nothing." He let that sit. Then, quieter, "Why'd you take this job?" "Asheville's 2 hours from anywhere you said you knew. 3 days notice. You're not dumb. You could have waited for something easier." Almost gave him the clean answer, the one I gave the agency. Instead, I told him the real one, because he just put himself on the floor in front of me, and the least I could do was meet it. "Old had MS," I said. "Last 6 years of it, I was the one. And everybody who came to help, the aides, the relatives, the church people, they all helped him the way that made them feel good, not the way he needed. They talked over him to me. They moved his stuff. They decided things in the kitchen while he sat in the next room hearing every word. I shrugged. He died when I was 24. Oh, I keep thinking if one person had just asked him how, instead of telling him it'd be okay, he'd have had a few years that felt like his. Orion didn't say sorry. I was grateful for that. He just nodded, slow, like I'd handed him something heavy and he was finding the right place to set it down. Oh, I'm your do-over, he said. Oh, I said. You're a guy with a couch that tried to kill you. But yeah, maybe I'm better at this because of him. Oh, and harder, at the same time. Easier because we'd stop pretending. Harder because once you stop pretending, the real problems are right there in the open, and the realest one was the second pile of mail. Or, to a head on a Monday. He was on the phone with someone from the insurance company, and I was in the next room not eavesdropping and hearing everything, and his voice was doing the thing where it got very calm and very precise, which I'd learned meant he was furious. They denied coverage on the standing frame his PT had prescribed, the device that would let him bear weight a few minutes a day, the thing his physical therapist swore would slow down the stuff happening to his bones and his circulation, as not medically necessary. $1,100 out of pocket if he wanted it, and he didn't have $1,100 because the contracting business had folded when he couldn't run a job site, and the disability payments covered the rent and the food and not much else. Pulling up, he sat there. Then he picked up the whole second pile of mail and very deliberately set it in the trash. Old Dorian. Full, don't. Old, that's not gonna make the numbers go away. He said. But I'm tired of looking at them. I fished the pile back out of the trash that night after he'd gone to bed because I'd watched my dad do the same thing and I knew where it led. I spread it out on the kitchen table. I'm not a financial genius, but I'd spent 6 years learning the language of denials and appeals and the specific cruelty of American medical billing, and I knew some things he didn't or had been too underwater to chase. The standing frame denial could be appealed. The PT just had to write a letter framing it as preventative against pressure injuries and DVT, which was true. There was a manufacturer assistance program for the chair maintenance he'd been paying out of pocket. The hospital bill from the original accident had a charity care threshold he qualified for and almost certainly hadn't applied to because nobody tells you these things. They just send you to collections and hope you give up. The collections notice for the ambulance. That one had a date on it that meant it was probably past the point they could legally do much, in this state, if he disputed it in writing. I didn't fix it that night. You can't. But I made a list, and in the morning I put it on the table next to his coffee, below the blue painter's tape line he'd never explained and I'd never asked about. Turned out it marked how high he could reliably reach, which I'd figured out, and started respecting without making a speech about it. Hold the list. He read it twice. Or mail. And I went through your trash. You put it there. He tapped the page, the PT thing. You can actually appeal that? Almost everything. They count on you not knowing that. It's the whole business model. He set the list down. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't earned yet and wasn't sure I wanted because it had hope in it, and hope was the thing he guarded hardest. Why? He said. You shouldn't have to choose between your bones and your rent in the richest country on earth, I said. And because I'm here, and I'm bored, and I'm petty, and I would genuinely love to make an insurance adjuster's week worse. Pick whichever reason you like. Smiled. All of them. We went to work. It became the thing we did in the afternoons when his energy dipped, sitting at the big table with my laptop and his shoebox of documents, me typing and him dictating. Both of us getting an education in just how many doors people slam on you when you can't stand up and pound on them. He was good at it once he got going. 40 years of arguing with subcontractors turned out to be excellent training for arguing with a claims department. A tone, polite, specific, citing the policy number and the prescribing physician and the relevant statute, that I started calling his contractor voice, and the first time a rep on the phone audibly caved, he hung up and pumped his fist like a man who'd just won a bid. The standing frame appeal went through in 3 weeks. The day the approval letter came, I read it out loud, and he just sat there, and then he said, like it had surprised him to win, like he'd forgotten that was on the menu. But I'm getting ahead of the part that actually tested it. Because somewhere in there, while we were filing appeals and arguing with strangers and slowly turning a rental into something that felt like a household, his sister called. Renee. She'd been calling weekly, and the calls always left him quieter, and one evening I picked up his phone to hand it to him and saw the text she'd sent before the call, the one he hadn't opened yet. Well, I didn't read it on purpose. I saw it the way you see a headline. It said something about a place near her in Ohio, an assisted living community, a brochure, how he wouldn't be alone, how she worried. Phone down on the table screen up and went to the other room because it wasn't mine to manage. But I heard the call. I heard him go quiet and then very calm, and then I heard the calm crack just slightly, just once, when he said, "I'm not a problem you need to file somewhere, Renee." Well, there was a long pause. Well, he said, "I have help. I'm handling things. The frame got approved. The hospital wrote off 40%. Renee, I'm okay. I'm actually okay." Pulling up, he sat in the kitchen for a while. I gave him the room. Then he called out, "Wheeze." Fold, I came to the doorway. Wants to drive down, see for herself. She thinks I'm telling her I'm fine the way I always tell her I'm fine. He rubbed his face. Which fair? I have a history. Ozol, when? Saturday. We cleaned. Not because the house was a mess, but because he wanted her to walk in and see a life, not a patient. He directed it from the chair, which cabinet, which angle, move that, no, back. We hung the standing frame approval letter on the fridge like a kid's report card, which was his idea, and which he immediately got embarrassed about, and which I left up anyway. Had me put the door back on the bathroom. She'll think the place is falling apart if there's a door in the garage, and then changed his mind an hour later and had me take it off again. Because, he said no. This is how I live here. She can see how I live here. Whole sentence stuck with me. This is how I live here. Showed up Saturday at noon. A sturdy, tired-looking woman with Dorian's exact eyes and a tote bag full of food she'd made like she didn't trust us to have any. She hugged him too long. She looked around the house, cataloging it. The ramp, the reorganized lower shelves, the missing bathroom door, the whiteboard, and I watched her do the math people do, the worry math, and I watched her not quite be able to make it add up to the disaster she'd braced for. Ordinal, she cornered me in the kitchen while he was in the other room. "Well, is he really?" she said low. "He says things." "Only appeals himself," I said. "I just type. He talked an adjuster into reversing a denial last Tuesday and gloat for an hour. He gets himself up off the floor now with a system he worked out. He's behind on nothing that matters." I paused. He's stubborn and he's proud and he's a pain in the neck about the dishwasher, and all of that is the part of him that's getting him through. If you put him somewhere with a meal schedule and a courtyard, you won't be saving him. You'll be taking the last thing he's got. What way? She looked at me for a long moment, this stranger telling her about her own brother. I thought she might be angry. Instead, her eyes went wet and she said, "He used to be the one who fixed everything. For all of us. I don't know how to be the one who can't fix him." "Won't have to fix him," I said. "He's not broken in the way you think. He just needs people to ask him how instead of telling him it'll be fine." Always with the back of her wrist, fast the way he did. Family resemblance in the gestures too. That night, after she'd gone to her motel and promised to come back for breakfast, Dorian and I sat on the back porch and watched the light go off the mountains. He had a beer he was nursing slow because of the meds. I had one I wasn't. "A push the Ohio thing," he said. She told me on the porch. Said she gets it now. He turned the bottle in his hands. She said you talked to her. Admit her handle, a little. "Oldie, what'd you say?" A pain in the neck. About the dishwasher. Ord. He laughed, a real one, the first full one I'd heard out of him, and it changed his whole face the way it does when somebody who guards their face finally stops. He said, when the laugh ran down. "First day, I told you not to get attached. Remember, it was before hello. Everybody that." He looked out at the dark. Figured if I said it first, it wouldn't surprise me when it was true. He took a slow breath. It's the first time it hasn't been true. Won't get a thing. He'd have hated that. I just said, "Door's still in the garage if you ever want a fresh start." And he snorted and we sat there until the cold drove us in. Almost 3 years ago. I'm still in the house on the gravel road, though my job title changed a while back from aide to something the paperwork doesn't really have a word for. Renee comes down twice a year and stays a week, and the three of us argue about the dishwasher together now. Contracting business is sort of back, in a smaller way. Dorian consults from the table, does the bids and the design and the arguing with suppliers part, and a couple of his old guys run the saws, and last spring they built a ramp for a man across the county for free. And Dorian directed the whole thing from his chair in the man's driveway, and was insufferable about it for days. The standing frame is in the corner of the living room. He uses it most mornings. The blue tape is still on the counter, even though we both know exactly where the line is. We'll ask, sometimes, how we ended up like this, family that isn't, and Dorian usually says, he showed up when I told him not to and never left when I told him to. And I say, I'm very bad at instructions, and he says the worst, and means something else entirely. All simpler than the joke. I didn't stay because he needed me. He'd have found his way off that floor with or without me. He'd already proved he could. I stayed because somewhere in those first 2 weeks he stopped showing me the exits and started showing me the house, and a man only does that when he's decided you're worth letting in close enough to see how he actually lives. Ole. And once you've seen that, once somebody trusts you with the real version, the difficult and the funny and the broke and the unbeatable parts all together, leaving stops being something you're brave enough to resist. It just becomes the stupidest thing you could possibly do. Well, I didn't, and I'm not planning to. Had somebody warn you off before they'd even said hello? Push you away not because they wanted to be alone, but because they were tired of watching people decide they were too much? What did you do? Tell me down in the comments. And if this one landed somewhere, leave a like, stick around, and I'll see you in the next one. Well, the thing I keep coming back to, almost 3 years later, is that everything good in that house started the moment I didn't grab Dorian off the floor. 40 minutes he'd been down there, furious and thin-voiced, and the easiest thing in the world would have been to scoop him up and feel like a hero for 10 seconds. But the last guy did exactly that, and it cost Dorian his sister's trust and almost cost him his home. Cause and effect board, and every choice in that little rental on the gravel road had a tail on it. When I asked him how, instead of telling him it'd be fine, he started telling me the truth. When I dug his mail back out of the trash instead of letting him bury it, the appeals got filed. When I respected the blue tape line without making a speech about it, he stopped showing me the exits and started showing me the house. From Dorian, and what I'd hand to anybody listening, is that helping somebody is not the same as taking charge of them and calling it kindness. The decent thing and the easy thing are almost never the same thing, and the gap between them is where you find out who you actually are. It would have been easy to talk over him to Renee in that kitchen. The right thing was to tell her the truth about her own brother and let her sit with it. But decency alone wasn't enough, and that's the part people skip. I had to actually learn the language of denials and appeals and charity care thresholds. Had to know that you can fight almost anything if you understand how the machine is built to wear you down. Caring without knowing how just makes you another person standing in the kitchen with good intentions and no idea what the man in the next room actually needs. You have to do the homework, or have to get smart about the thing you're trying to fix. And then you have to outlast it. Dorian's whole life was a refusal to quit, getting himself up off that floor with a system he'd worked out alone, arguing an adjuster into reversing a denial and pumping his fist like he'd won a bid. He taught me that the stubbornness everybody wanted to medicate out of him was the exact thing keeping him alive. The grit. The willingness to file the appeal a 4th time after 3 rejections. Well, if you take anything from Wesley and Dorian, take this. Be the kind of person who asks how. Get good enough at something real that your kindness has hands. And when the thing in front of you keeps saying no, say it again calmly, on the record, one more time than it expects. I didn't stay because Dorian needed me. I stayed because being trusted with the real version of a person is the rarest thing there is, and walking away from that is the only mistake I'd have never forgiven myself for.